Welcome, everyone, to Easy History Podcast. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into ancient Mesopotamia.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, two empires that, well, they really shook things up. The Hittites and the Assyrians. We're going to be uncovering how they rose to power, what made them unique. And, yeah, we'll even touch on that whole king slapping during coronation thing.
Sounds interesting.
Intrigued. I thought so.
Well, it's easy to just jump right into, battles and empires and all that. But to truly understand these guys, we need to zoom out a bit first. So imagine a map of the ancient world, right? And you see these waves of migration, people and ideas spreading across continents. That's where our story really begins with something called Indo-European and Semitic language families.
Okay, so not battles right away, but these language families. Are we talking about like ancient family reunions? I'm kidding, but seriously, what's the connection here?
Think of it like this. These language families are like the branches of a massive family tree, each one indicating a shared origin, a common ancestor language. And as these groups migrated, their languages spread, influencing the development of new languages and cultures. The Hittites and Assyrians, though distinct, they emerged from these broader migratory movements.
So their stories are kind of interwoven with this larger tapestry of human movement and cultural exchange.
Got it.
But you mentioned something about the Hittites and horses earlier.
Right. For the Indo-Europeans from whom the Hittites descended, domesticating the horse wasn't just about transportation, it was a revolution. Suddenly, armies could cover vast distances, trade flourished, and the very idea of borders and distances changed. Imagine the impact on warfare.
It's like going from dial-up to broadband, right? Everything speeds up, information travels faster, the whole world feels smaller. I can see how that would be a game changer. But wasn't there something about chariots, too?
The chariot was the culmination of that revolution. Picture this. Horses, already powerful on their own, are now harnessed to a mobile platform, essentially a war machine on wheels. This innovation, developed in Anatolia and Upper Mesopotamia, gave a huge edge to those who mastered it, particularly the Hittites and later the Assyrians.
Okay, so horses are the internet, chariots are the tanks. What's the ancient equivalent of a nuclear weapon?
Well, that might be iron. The development of iron metallurgy was pivotal. Imagine armies clashing, but now one side has weapons made of a stronger, more durable metal. That's the advantage the Hittites and Assyrians had. Iron changed the game of warfare.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the Hittites. They were centered in Anatolia, right? That's modern-day Turkey for anyone listening who's geographically challenged like me.
Exactly, and their capital city, Hattusa, was near present-day Ankara. Now the Hittites, armed with their chariots and iron weapons, gradually expanded their territory. They even challenged and eventually conquered a kingdom called the Mitanni.
Now this is where things get really interesting. Unlike many ancient empires that were ruled by, god kings, the Hittites had a different system, right?
Absolutely. Their king wasn't seen as divinely appointed. Instead, he was elected by an assembly of warriors. Imagine that. A king chosen by the people he'd lead in battle. It was a system with checks and balances, almost proto-democratic in a way, making them quite unique for their time.
Wow, an elected king. That's wild for a time when most rulers claim to be, chosen by the gods. It makes you wonder how that system influenced their society and military strategy.
That's a question worth pondering. And under a particularly powerful king, Suppiluliuma I, the Hittites grew into a vast empire, putting them on a collision course with another major power, the Egyptian Empire. This rivalry culminated in the famous Battle of Kadesh.
Okay, I've got to ask. Kadesh was an all-out bloodbath? Give us the epic battle details.
Kadesh was indeed a massive clash, possibly the largest chariot battle ever fought. However, the outcome was surprisingly peaceful. Both sides claimed victory, but the result was a stalemate, followed by diplomatic treaties and even royal marriages between the two empires.
Whoa, so after such a massive military showdown, they chose peace and diplomacy. That's unexpected. It seems they understood that endless war wasn't always the answer. So what ultimately led to the Hittite Empire's decline?
Their fall is complex. It wasn't a single event, more like a perfect storm brewing. Imagine labor shortages crippling their economy, attacks from mysterious sea peoples disrupting trade and security, and finally, a new power, the Phrygians, migrating from the Danube region and ultimately taking over their territory.
So internal pressures, external threats, and ultimately being overtaken by a new wave of migrants. It's a reminder that even mighty empires are vulnerable to change. But now let's shift gears and talk about the other powerhouse in our deep dive, the Assyrians. They started as a regional power in northern Mesopotamia, right?
Right, centered around the city of Assur, which gave them their name. Their rise, unlike the Hittites, was more gradual, marked by key rulers who strategically expanded their territory through both diplomacy and military campaigns.
So they weren't just brute force conquerors. They were playing the long game, using a mix of tactics to gain power. Tell us about some of these key players who shaped the Assyrian rise.
One standout figure was Tiglath-Pileser I. Under his rule, they expanded their reach significantly, even clashing with the once mighty Babylonian kingdom, which was experiencing its own decline at the time. This victory really signaled the Assyrians' growing power and ambition.
It sounds like the ancient world was a constant Game of Thrones, with empires rising and falling, always vying for control. So who came after Tiglath-Pileser I? Was there another ruler who pushed them further towards empire status?
Yes, a ruler named Sargon II took the reins, and he was a force to be reckoned with. Sargon II pushed westward, conquering Syria and Palestine, ultimately reaching the Mediterranean Sea. This expansion brought them an immense wealth and control over vital trade routes. They were becoming a major player on the world stage.
Reaching the Mediterranean, that's a huge strategic win. Talk about controlling the flow of goods and information. It seems like every Assyrian king was pushing the boundaries of their empire further.
Yeah.
But what about their capital city? Wasn't there something special about Nineveh?
You're right, Nineveh becomes a crucial part of the Assyrian story. It was actually Sennacherib who decided to move the capital there, and he went all out in making it a truly magnificent city.
Nineveh, wasn't that one of the largest cities in the ancient world? I remember reading about its legendary gardens and impressive walls.
Exactly. Under Sennacherib and his successors, Nineveh transformed into this bustling metropolis with a population exceeding 80,000. It's hard to grasp just how massive that was for its time. They had sophisticated infrastructure like aqueducts and canals bringing fresh water into the city. And of course, there were the famed Hanging Gardens, a testament to their engineering skills and a symbol of their power.
Okay, hold on, Hanging Gardens. Wasn't that a Babylonian thing? Am I getting my ancient wonders mixed up?
That's a common confusion. The Hanging Gardens you're thinking of were indeed a marvel of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, built much later by Nebuchadnezzar II. Sennacherib's gardens in Nineveh were also impressive, but different in design and scale. Think sprawling parks and orchards designed to showcase the empire's wealth and agricultural prowess.
Got it. Ancient empires and their love for grand gardens. So we've got ambitious kings, expanding borders, and this incredible capital city. But let's not forget, the Assyrians were also known for their military might. How did they become such a dominant force on the battlefield?
Well, they were masters of military strategy and innovation. They perfected the use of chariots, developing specialized units for different combat situations. But they didn't stop there. They also pioneered siege warfare techniques using battering rams and siege towers to break down enemy defenses. Think of them as the ancient world's heavy artillery.
So it wasn't just brute force. They were strategic, organized, and constantly adapting their techniques. But weren't they also known for their, let's say, persuasive tactics? I'm talking about their reputation for being pretty ruthless.
That's putting it mildly. The Assyrians understood psychological warfare. They would often use extreme violence and cruelty to instill fear in their enemies. And they were masters of propaganda, documenting their victories in elaborate carvings and inscriptions, essentially saying, look what happens to those who defy us.
So it was shock and awe, ancient style. They wanted everyone to know that challenging the Assyrian Empire was a bad idea. But wasn't there also something about them relocating entire populations?
Deportation, right? Yes, deportation was a key tactic. They would uproot entire communities from conquered territories and resettle them elsewhere in the empire. This served multiple purposes. It disrupted resistance, provided them with a source of cheap labor, and helped to integrate diverse populations into their empire.
It sounds brutal, but also strategically clever. By scattering and mixing populations, they were preventing uprisings and creating a more homogeneous empire. It's a fascinating and somewhat unsettling look into how they maintained control. But beyond just military might and control, what about their cultural legacy? Did they contribute anything beyond tales of war and conquest?
Absolutely. One of the most significant contributions was their dedication to preserving knowledge. Ashurbanipal, considered the last great Assyrian king, established a massive library in Nineveh, which contained not just Assyrian records, but also texts from previous Mesopotamian civilizations.
Wait, a library? That doesn't really fit the image of a ruthless warrior empire. What was their motivation for collecting all these texts?
It seems they genuinely valued knowledge and saw themselves as inheritors of a long intellectual tradition. This library, with its thousands of clay tablets covering everything from literature and law to science and magic, was a testament to their desire to preserve and study the wisdom of the past.
Wow, that's a side of the Assyrians we don't often hear about. It challenges the simplistic view of them as just brutal conquerors. So they were fierce warriors, strategic rulers, and surprisingly, patrons of learning. It's a reminder that history is full of these complexities and contradictions.
Exactly, and it's these nuances that make studying history so fascinating. But even with their military might, sophisticated administration, and cultural achievements, the Assyrian Empire couldn't last forever. The seeds of their decline were already sown even at the height of their power.
Right, as they say, all good things must come to an end, even mighty empires. So what were the cracks in the Assyrian facade? What caused this seemingly unstoppable force to crumble?
Well, for one thing, they had become victims of their own success. Their empire had grown so vast that it became incredibly difficult to manage. Their administrative systems, while advanced for the time, were struggling to keep up with the demands of such a sprawling territory. Imagine trying to communicate and coordinate across an empire that stretched from modern-day Iraq to Egypt, relying on messengers and limited infrastructure.
I can see how logistics alone would be a nightmare. It's like trying to run a global corporation using carrier pigeons. So internal administration was a problem, but were there other pressures as well?
Oh, absolutely. Remember those nomadic groups we talked about earlier, like the Medes, Scythians, and Cimmerians? They were constantly testing the Assyrian borders, probing for weaknesses, and internally the empire was becoming increasingly unstable. Different factions were vying for power, resources were stretched thin, and rebellions were brewing in conquered territories.
It sounds like the classic recipe for an empire's downfall. Overextension, internal strife, and relentless external pressure.
Exactly. And the final blow came in the form of a coordinated attack. A rebellion in Babylon, fueled by resentment towards Assyrian rule and supported by the Medes, who saw an opportunity to weaken their longtime rival, proved to be the tipping point.
So it wasn't just one thing, but a confluence of factors that ultimately brought down the mighty Assyrian Empire. It's a reminder that even the strongest empires are vulnerable to internal and external pressures.
Precisely. And from the ashes of the Assyrian Empire rose a new power, one we've already touched upon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, with Nebuchadnezzar II at its helm.
Ah, Nebuchadnezzar. Now there's a name that conjures up images of grandeur and power. Wasn't he the one who rebuilt Babylon into a magnificent city that rivaled even Nineveh?
He did. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon experienced a renaissance. He rebuilt the city with impressive structures like the Ishtar Gate, a monumental entrance adorned with colorful glazed bricks, and of course the legendary Hanging Gardens, considered one of the seven wonders of the ancient world.
The Hanging Gardens. I knew I had those right. It's amazing to think about the engineering and artistry that went into creating such a structure. It must have been a true spectacle to behold.
Indeed. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, under Nebuchadnezzar's rule, became a center of power and culture, marking a significant shift in the balance of power in the region.
So as one empire falls, another rises. It's a classic pattern throughout history. But it's also a good reminder that even in the midst of destruction and upheaval, there's always the potential for renewal and the creation of something new.
That's a very insightful observation, and the transition from the Assyrian Empire to the Neo-Babylonian Empire is a perfect example of this cycle of destruction and renewal.
It makes you wonder what those who lived through these transitions felt, the fall of one empire and the rise of another. It must have been a time of great uncertainty, but also a time of opportunity.
You're right, those transitional periods are often overlooked, but they hold so much historical significance. Where we see power dynamics shift, new ideas emerge, and the course of history gets redirected.
It's like standing at a crossroads, not knowing which path will lead to the future. But speaking of the future, our time for this segment is drawing to a close. Where do we go from here? What awaits us in the final part of our deep dive?
Well, we've explored the rise and fall of the Hittites and the Assyrians, witnessed the emergence of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and touched upon the legendary Nebuchadnezzar II. But even the most magnificent empires face their twilight. In our final segment, we'll delve into the factors that led to the decline of the Neo-Babylonians and the rise of a new power on the horizon, the Persians, led by the enigmatic Cyrus the Great.
Cyrus the Great. Now that's a name that echoes through history. Join us next time as we complete our journey through ancient Mesopotamia and explore the enduring legacy of these fascinating empires. Welcome back to our deep dive into the ancient Mesopotamian empires. Last time, we left off with the Neo-Babylonian Empire at its peak, a shining beacon of power and culture under Nebuchadnezzar II. But as we've seen throughout history, empires, well, like everything else, they have a lifespan.
That's right, nothing lasts forever. And the Neo-Babylonian Empire, despite its grandeur, was no exception. Several factors contributed to its eventual decline.
Okay, so let's unravel this. What were the cracks in this seemingly invincible empire? Was it internal struggles, external pressures, or maybe a bit of both?
It was a combination, really. Remember how we talked about the Assyrians overextending themselves? Well, the Neo-Babylonians, despite their initial success, they faced similar challenges. Maintaining control over such a vast territory, with the communication and infrastructure limitations of the time, it was a constant struggle.
Makes sense. Even with the best intentions, trying to govern an empire stretching across diverse landscapes and cultures, it must have been incredibly difficult. But were there other pressures kind of bubbling beneath the surface?
Absolutely. Internally, after Nebuchadnezzar's death, a series of, weak rulers couldn't quite fill his shoes. This led to internal power struggles and instability, weakening the empire from within. At the same time, a new force was emerging on the eastern horizon, the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great.
Cyrus. I've heard his name whispered in history books. Wasn't he known for his military genius and a more tolerant approach to ruling conquered peoples? What made him such a formidable opponent?
Cyrus was a brilliant strategist, no doubt. He managed to unite the various Persian tribes, forging them into a powerful, cohesive fighting force. But he was also a shrewd diplomat. He understood that winning hearts and minds was just as important as military victories. He offered clemency to those who surrendered, respected local customs, and even allowed some exiled populations to return to their homelands.
So it wasn't just brute force. Cyrus was playing a smarter game, combining military strength with a more inclusive approach to governance. No wonder he became known as Cyrus the Great. How did the Neo-Babylonians fare against this rising tide?
Well, weakened by internal strife and facing a leader like Cyrus, their defenses crumbled. The final straw came when Cyrus, he cleverly diverted the Euphrates River, allowing his troops to enter Babylon through the supposedly impenetrable city gates. It was a strategic masterstroke that signaled the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
Wow, talk about outsmarting your opponent. Diverting a whole river to conquer a city that's thinking outside the box, ancient style. So Cyrus and the Persians swept in, ushering in a new era in the region.
Exactly. And with the rise of the Persian Empire, a new chapter in Mesopotamian history began. The Persians inherited a rich legacy from the empires that came before them, incorporating elements of Babylonian, Assyrian, and even Hittite culture into their vast empire. It's a reminder that history is a constant flow, with each era building upon the foundations of the past.
It's fascinating to see how these empires, though often rivals, ultimately contributed to this tapestry of cultural exchange and innovation. But before we wrap up our deep dive, I have one final question for you and for our listeners. The Hittites, despite their military prowess, ultimately chose diplomacy and peace with Egypt. The Assyrians, on the other hand, built their empire on military dominance and, let's be honest, some pretty brutal tactics. Then we had the Neo-Babylonians, who seemed to strike a balance between military strength and cultural achievement. What do you think these different approaches tell us about power, leadership, and the legacies empires leave behind?
That's a great question, and one that historians continue to debate. There's no easy answer, but I think it highlights the complexity of power and the choices leaders make. The Hittites, perhaps recognizing the futility of endless war, opted for a more peaceful path. The Assyrians, driven by ambition and a desire for control, chose a more ruthless approach. And the Neo-Babylonians, under Nebuchadnezzar, seemed to find a middle ground, focusing on both military strength and cultural development. Ultimately, the legacies they left behind are just as diverse as their approaches to power. The Hittites contributed to early legal systems and international diplomacy. The Assyrians, despite their brutality, played a key role in preserving knowledge and spreading Mesopotamian culture. And the Neo-Babylonians left us with architectural marvels and a renewed focus on the arts and sciences.
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. These empires, with all their triumphs and flaws, have shaped the course of human civilization. And their stories continue to fascinate and inspire us today. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but it's just a glimpse into the rich and complex history of ancient Mesopotamia. We encourage you to explore further, to delve into the lives of these ancient peoples, and to ponder the enduring impact they've had on our world. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey through time.